Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing my April mid-month wrap-up. So we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the first 2 weeks of April. And let's just go ahead and jump right in with the very first book, and that is The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi. This is the first book in the Gilded Wolves trilogy. It is a young adult historical fantasy, and in this particular book we are following Severin, who is the head of a gang of con artists, sort of. They really like to acquire magical objects extra legally, and in until one day Severin actually gets caught and is more or less blackmailed into another heist that's even bigger. But if he does actually fulfill, complete the heist, then he gets to regain his lost inheritance. And so he, of course, agrees. And the story goes from there. I have already done a full-length review for this, so I will leave that linked down below, and I'm not going to get too much in depth with this, but generally speaking, I loved the characters. I especially loved that we had a good diverse representation among the characters for race and ethnicity, as well as queerness, and Sophia, one of the characters, is autistic. I really enjoyed all of that. I did find that the heist was a lot more Indiana Jones, with solving puzzles and trying to outsmart the bad guys, and less Ocean's 11, which is much more like heist, like figuring out how to get around all the security measures, right? And I didn't mind that, actually, and I liked it that we got some pictures in here to help us understand the puzzles that our characters are trying to solve. This is set in Paris at the time of the World Expo, which I think is interesting, and it didn't feel just like any other city. It did feel a bit like Paris, but I wasn't really sure why we chose that particular time and place when it didn't really seem to have an impact on the plot or the story at all. That was a little bit disappointing, because we were choosing such a specific time and place in history. I thought it would have more of an impact, so I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't. The magic system in this is probably the weakest point, in that we really don't know how any of it works. All we know is that some people are able to create magical items, but we don't know how. We don't know any of the limitations. There's like nothing explained, and that really does bother me. But that's like my biggest complaint. And honestly, it didn't really hinder my enjoyment of this book, and I ended up giving it 4.75 stars. After that, I read When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi, the second book in the Singing Hills cycle. So this is an adult Asian inspired fantasy novella. Obviously the second in the series, but in this one we are following our main character of Chi, who is a cleric who kind of goes around the country gathering as much information as possible, whether that is like stories or history or like just general how to do things, and they are trying to get to a particular destination and enlist the help of Siyu, who is a mammoth rider. And when they get to the way station, they end up cornered by these 3 tigers who really want to eat them, and she ends up holding them off by telling a very famous story known both to the humans and the tigers, and they are trying to tell this story so that the tigers don't eat them, and keep it going long enough so that help can come without boring the tigers, so that the tigers remember that maybe they should eat the humans. And the story goes from there. This is another one I already have a full-length review for. I will leave it linked down below. But overall, I really liked this. The world building was minimal, but enough. It built on the first story, but did not rely upon the first story. So if you want to read this as a standalone, that is absolutely fine to do. We had interesting character development, not a ton of it, but it did leave me wanting more from some of these characters. The really interesting thing about this is that story within a story, because it is a story that is well known to both the tigers and the humans. And we are actually kind of doing an examination of how stories change based off of who is telling them. Because Chi knows the story the human way, and so it fits in with humans' ideals and ethics and values and uplifts the human component in the story, while the tigers know the story a different way because they have changed it to fit within their own morals and ethics and values and to uphold the tiger character in the story. And so it's a really interesting look at how one story can change based off of who's telling it. And so I really enjoyed that, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. After that, I ended up reading Velveteen versus the Seasons by Seanan McGuire, the 3rd book in the Velveteen Versus series. So the Velveteen Versus series is a superhero series of short stories that are bound up in novels. So this is actually this is the 3rd book in the series, and it's just a bunch of short stories all about the same person, and that is Velveteen. And Velveteen used to be a kid hero, was trained by the corporation, and then when she came of age, she ended up leaving the corporation, and her life kind of very quickly went very terribly, and she's trying to kind of stay under the radar, but unfortunately circumstances led her to do some things that caught the eye of the corporation. And that was all in the 1st book, and I can't tell you much more about it. And the only thing that I can say about this volume 3 is that in the previous volume, Velveteen ended up making a deal with the Seasons, and now in this book, she has to uphold her obligation. I know that's very vague, and that's all I can say without spoilers. So, I really liked the world building in this and the exploration of the seasonal lands, because we haven't been there before, so we don't know it, or we have, but we haven't really been able to explore them in any kind of depth, and we were able to do that in this one. I still love Velma, our main character, Velveteen. She is great. She is definitely my favorite, and we got to see some of our old favorites, so that made me really happy as well. However, because Velveteen spent so much time in the seasonal lands, she really wasn't doing any superheroing. And superhero stories are really a mix of fantasy with their superpowers and a crime novel and waxing poetic about ethics and morals and that kind of thing. It's a very specific kind of mix to get a superhero story, right? But because she wasn't doing any of the superheroing stuff, we didn't have any of the crime, we didn't have any of those moral ethical things that come along with being a superhero. And so it was really just kind of her being a magic user in a magical land. And that's not really what I wanted from this book, unfortunately. The reason I love this series is because it's a superhero series. And this just didn't feel like a superhero book. Additionally, the ending didn't quite land for me, partially because I know that the publisher who has been doing these books is now out of business. And so I don't know that we're ever going to get a book 4. And where we ended in book 3, it's not a good place to end a series. And so I think that if we eventually get a book 4, this book will be a fine middle book, something different where we had to kind of take care of the seasonal lands and it makes sense within the overarching storyline. But I think that if we don't get a book 4, this is kind of a disappointing end to the series. So that's kind of where my disappointment comes in, because there isn't a 4th book planned at the moment. But overall, I did end up giving this 4 stars because I do think, like I said, the world building was really great. Velveteen was really great. I enjoyed so much of it. So I still ended up giving it 4 stars. After that, I read After Eden by Helen Douglas. And this is a YA science fiction in which we're following our main character of Eden, and Eden notices that there is a new boy in school, and he is very mysterious because he does not seem to get pop culture references or recognize very popular things. And one day she realizes that the reason is because he's actually a time traveler from the future with an important mission that she maybe just messed up by finding out that he's a time traveler. And the story kind of goes from there. I it's been less than a week since I've read this, and I don't remember a ton about it, which says something. It had a really fast-paced, interesting beginning, but as the book went on, it kind of slowed down and got a little muddled in the middle, and then the ending was incredibly predictable. So, not great overall. Um, I think that there was like definite world building issues in this, but I did find okay, and I found some things to be really uneven because like part of the ending, and I can't tell you, I don't know how to describe it other than part of the ending, but part of the ending was done in an incredibly interesting way, and I really liked that aspect of it. But the twist ending, part of the ending, I saw coming from like almost like probably a third of the way through the novel, which is not really a good twist. And then honestly, how it ended was very much a romance ending. Like there was a strong romantic component throughout this entire book, but it did the YA thing that sometimes happens with YA books, where it's a strong component and then the ending is very much a romance ending. And I didn't necessarily appreciate that. So it was overall, it wasn't terrible. It was an enjoyable way to spend a Sunday afternoon, but not anything that I would recommend you go out of your way to pick up, because it's just not that amazing. But I ended up giving it 3.25 stars. After that, I read Calculated Risks by Seanan McGuire, and this is the 10th book in the Encrypted series, which is an adult urban fantasy series where we follow the Price family, which is a family of cryptozoologists who liaison with and study and sometimes kill the monsters that we don't even know exist in our own world. In this particular book, we are following Sarah. It is the conclusion of Sarah's arc, and when we when this book starts, Sarah has found herself in an alternate dimension with some of her allies, and she has to figure out a way to get back to Earth with everybody else, and there are many problems that start cropping up basically immediately. I know, super vague, but I really don't want to spoil the ending of the last book. So that's this book. I thought that this was an interesting conclusion to Sarah's arc. It very much felt like so the previous book, book 9, and this one really felt like it was one story just broken up into 2 books, which is generally how duology feels. And this really led me to understand that this series, the Encrypted series, is really a bunch of smaller series within the larger one. So like books 1 and 2 and then 5 are like Verity's trilogy, and then books 3 and 4 are Alex's duology. 6, 7, and 8 are Antimony's trilogy, and then this one is Sarah's duology. And they're all related, and they will influence, and they will influence each other, but it's very much a series of series. And I don't know that I love that. And I think that might be part of the reason why I'm struggling to connect with this series, even though Seanan McGuire is like my favorite author. It's still good. It's just like I'm not connecting it in a deep kind of way. The ending of this, however, I did not like, mostly because there's a lot of questions, like not there. It's not the question. It's the kind of thing where I think I just wanted this to be a Sarah trilogy, because I want to see how things are going to develop with a lot of different questions. And I'm not sure. There's going to be another book after this that follows a different family member, Alice, and I don't see how, if we're following Alice, we're going to get the answers to the questions that I have, because it's just gonna, they don't tend to like spend as much time with each other. So I don't know that we're going to get the questions answered in the next book, and like that bothers me because this is stuff I am actually incredibly interested to know. I do think that there was a lot of incredible additional world building done in this. We finally got some of the character development that I was looking for. That all was good. I will say that there are content warnings in this for spiders. Just a heads up. But overall, still did really enjoy my time with it, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then lastly, I read The Spirit Thief by Rachel Aaron, which is the first book in this bind up. It's the first book in the Legend of Eli Mon Press series, which is an adult fantasy series. And we're following our main character of Eli, but Eli is a very famous thief, and he has decided he's going to steal a king from one of the kingdoms that is just kind of around, and things don't go well almost immediately. And then the story goes from there. This one was actually a buddy read with Julie. I will leave Julie's channel linked down below, and we both kind of like did not really connect with this story. Now, my problem was I did not love any of the characters. I didn't really care about them, except for one, and it was a swordsman who was kind of one of Eli's companions. But otherwise, I didn't really care. I think I'm supposed to be intrigued about like their backstory, but I just never got to that point where I was intrigued. The magic didn't really do it for me. It's not really magic. It's more talking to, everything has a spirit, and like certain people can talk to those spirits. And that's just not a magic system that generally does it for me. It's not bad. It's just not for me, really. And especially with this particular system, because the spirits kind of feel very human. And like, I don't know what about that. It's like, it's one of those things where I don't know how I feel about that, but I wasn't quite in love with it. So the magic, whatever, spirits part of it didn't really like do it for me either. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't for me. It was fast paced and action packed. However, I did find myself struggling to want to continue because like I said, I just didn't connect with like any part of this story. So it's like, I don't know why I'm supposed to care. Until we got to the ending, and the ending was very interesting. Like, I definitely have some questions. I'm intrigued about certain things. I do think that mostly the ending was done pretty well. There were a couple flubs that I noticed, but I was just like, it's fine. But like the ending was definitely very interesting. However, it wasn't quite interesting enough to really pull me into wanting to continue this series. So I'm not going to, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. So that is what I read for the first 2 weeks. So for my plans for the next 2 weeks, well, I have 2 books left on my April TBR, and that is Blood Heir by Alona Andrews and You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel. Blood Heir is going to be my next book. You Deserve Each Other, I don't actually know when I'm going to get to because I put it on hold at my library. Like, everybody and their mother decided that they needed to read this book, and so now there's a wait list. So I don't exactly know when it's going to be available for me. But I did decide, other than Blood Heir, I did check out The Game Plan by Kristen Callahan, which is another book from my Excited for Romance series. So I'll at least be making progress on that. And I decided that since in the next week I'm going to be doing a lot of driving, I'm going to give audiobooks a try because audiobooks have never worked for me. I know a lot of people, it really works well for them when they are driving, so I'm going to give that a shot. Maybe that'll be the right way for me to listen to audiobooks. And I also did pick up some audiobooks that I have already read before, so if I do like don't pay attention, it's not going to be the end of the world because I already know how it's going to go anyway. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and other than that, I don't really know what I'm going to be reading. But I am excited for seeing if audiobooks work for me. As for what I am going to be doing with all of these books, so I actually had a great reading month, and I am going to be keeping all of these books. They're immediately going onto my shelves with all the rest of the books I love. That being The Gilded Wolves, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, Velveteen versus the Seasons, and Calculated Risks. Those are all just going straight onto the shelves behind me. The Legend of Eli Mompress is actually my spouse's book, so it's going to go back on his shelf. And then After Eden was a library book, and it has already been returned back to the library. So that is it, you guys. Let me know down below what you have been reading and if you have any thoughts about the books that I have read. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!